This week on Disaffected, we look at yet another gorgon in disguise, a mommy vlogger with a camera-perfect life who was arrested on 6 felony counts of child abuse after her son escaped and begged a neighbor for food. Then we'll look at the continued feminist denial of women's agency in order to blame men. A sorority in Wyoming forced the members to accept a 6'2" predatory male pervert as a sister. But according to top feminists, it's hating on women to point out that they sell their own sex to the highest social justice bidder. And this week in New Normal, we'll talk about the mayor of Chicago suing Hyundai and not car thieves. All that and more this week on Disaffected. Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum, coming to you from dystopian Burlington, Vermont, and this is the show where we talk about politics, culture, and relationships through a psychological lens. We're going to talk this week about Ruby Franke. Many of you have probably already heard of her. She is the mommy vlogger. Did I say that right? Who made a reality show out of her family, who has been arrested for felony child abuse. This is a fast-moving story. We're not a breaking news show. We're a weekly show. So by the time you see this, other things may have come into the news. But just to give you the basic rundown of the facts. Ruby Franke is a woman who lives in Utah. She's married to her husband, Kevin Franke. They've got 6 children, and she ran a mommy lifestyle YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. That was taken down by YouTube, I believe, early in this year, 2023. After that was taken down, and without comment, apparently, Ruby Franke joined her therapist friend, Jody Hildebrandt, on Jody's YouTube channel called Connections Classroom. And on that channel, they continued to give parenting and family advice. It appears that Jody was in on the child abuse with Ruby. Jody has also been charged with 6 felony counts of child abuse. I also just learned that Kevin Franke, Ruby Franke's husband, has been charged. I don't know the details. He's been charged with child abuse as well. For years, apparently, neighbors of this family in Utah and viewers of her show, 8 Passengers, have complained that she was abusive and that they feared she punished her children too harshly. One example was an allegation that she made her son sleep not in a bed but on a beanbag for 7 straight months as punishment for some sort of infraction. In some of the clips I've seen, she appears to be calling her 12-year-old daughter fat in public in a doctor's office and encouraging her to diet. Now, Ruby Franke's 18-year-old daughter, Sherry, one of the 6 children, called police in 2022 to say that her younger siblings were left home alone for 5 days while Ruby was on a trip with a friend. And last week, Ruby's 12-year-old son showed up at a neighbor's house, malnourished and thirsty, begging for food. He had rope and duct tape on his wrists and open wounds. Cops found Ruby's 10-year-old daughter at Jody Hildebrandt's house, also tied up, also emaciated. Cops described the condition of the children as severe. So, as I said before, now Ruby Franke and her friend, Jody Hildebrandt, both charged with 6 counts of felony child abuse. Her husband, Kevin Franke, also charged with child abuse. I don't know the details. But I'm going to play you a clip from ABC News that includes the initial 911 phone call from the neighbor.
We turn now to the parenting influencer charged with child abuse. Ruby Franke is set to appear in court today, and we're now hearing the 911 call that led to her arrest. Kana Whitworth is here with more. Good morning, Kana.
Hey, Rebecca, good morning. That call was one that an officer I spoke with said gave him the goosebumps because they had sounded the alarm about a problem in that home last year after several concerning phone calls were made to the Department of Children and Family Services.
911, the address of your emergency.
This morning, ABC News obtaining the dramatic 911 call that led to the arrest of YouTube influencer Ruby Franke on child abuse charges.
Tell me exactly what's happened. I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and he's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry and he's thirsty.
A neighbor alerting authorities when police say Ruby's 12-year-old son showed up at their front door pleading for help. The boy's condition bringing the neighbor to tears.
He has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. Oh, and he has them around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Dispatchers sending authorities to the Utah home of Frankie's business partner, Jody Hildebrand, also arrested last week there. Authorities say they found Frankie's 10-year-old daughter emaciated as well.
You know there's been problems at this neighbor's house.
Frankie, known for her controversial parenting methods on YouTube.
I'm not even going to let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done.
ABC News has obtained records showing police responded to the Frankie's home more than a dozen times over the last few years, including reports of juvenile problems in 2018 and welfare checks in 2022. Police saying a judge denied a search warrant to go into the home.
When you hear that as law enforcement, and you know that a year ago efforts were made, what's your reaction?
That's not right. It's unfair. These children don't deserve that.
Now I'm told that the 10 and 12-year-old had to be taken to the hospital. Right now, DCFS is in charge of their placement, along with the other 2 children who are minors. Remember, they also have 2 adult children, and you guys, authorities tell me that one of them, indeed, made multiple calls to DCFS herself, warning about a problem.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of this could have been avoided. Kana, thank you.
Hi, everyone.
So, juvenile problems. Really. I know about those. That's what happens to abused children. They get sent to juvenile hall. Or a care facility, as we like to euphemistically say today. That's what happened to me, of course. It's what happened to my sister. It's what happens to millions of children with abusive parents. We go to prison for the crimes of our parents. This is going back 5 years, reports of this stuff going back 5 years. You know, most of the time, not all the time, but almost all the time, when a parent has a child who might fairly be described as out of control, perhaps acting out dangerously, almost every time it's because of the parenting in the home. It's almost never the case. It is sometimes, but it's a very small minority of cases where there's apparently a child who's a born bad seed. I've seen it happen. I think that's a real thing. But it's not the first thing that should jump into people's mind. Juvenile problems, really. Not Ruby Frankie, narcissistic mommy problems. No. You know, no, I'm not going to ask how this can happen. It is so disturbing to me that millions of people watch these family vlog shows, reality TV. They're just reality TV. It's just turning your family into a reality TV show. That alone, all by itself, even if nothing you ever see on that show sounds abusive or looks abusive to you on its face, simply the act of making your family into a reality TV show is an act of abuse. I was talking about this with Kevin before we did the show. I call it a big honking red flag, but it's not. It's not a red flag. It's the thing itself. It's not indicating that something is happening. It is itself the abuse. It's an invasion of privacy. It's turning your children into little actors and actresses for you. And yet millions of people watch this and act as though they're surprised. They act as though there's something wholesome about this. And I'm not talking about podcasters or public personalities who from time to time may talk to their kids. You may hear them on their podcasts. That's normal stuff. That's not necessarily abusive. It's this reality TV stuff. You know, I couldn't bring you as many clips as I wanted to bring you. I couldn't bring you any, actually, from the original show, 8 Passengers, nor could I bring you any from Jody and Ruby's Connections Classroom, because the internet today, what happens is, as soon as something like this happens, everything has disappeared. Maybe there are people out there who know how to, I'm sure there are people who are better researchers at this sort of stuff than me, but you just can't find the stuff. It just disappears. But I was able to catch a few clips from secondary sources who were also commenting on this. And, you know, the camera follows them everywhere. It follows them into their bedrooms. There was a scene where one of the parents had taken the doorknob off one of the child's bedrooms so that you could see through the hole where the lock set used to be. Just weird stuff. They're at the doctor's office. They're at the dentist's office. Ruby Franke is making comments about what appears to be her 11 or 12-year-old daughter's weight. It just, you know, we've seen this time and time again. You know, Anna Nicole Smith is a great example. You remember Anna Nicole Smith? She's been dead for years. She was sort of the Texas trailer park version of modern Marilyn Monroe. She dragged her child into her reality TV series, you know, that shit show that was her home. We see celebrities doing this all the time. Angelina Jolie does it with her children. Madonna does it with her children. It's particularly the women with adopted children. Putting them on display, using them as accessories for a little extra publicity. Now, you know who cast the mold for this, right? Do you remember the first celebrity to pimp her children out for the cameras? To get motherhood points, push along her career a little bit? That's right, it's Joan Crawford. Making her daughter Christina wear matching mommy-daughter pinafores and curtsy to the reporters from Photo Play magazine. Everybody around the Crawford household would comment on what delightfully English manners little Miss Christina had. Like a marionette. Just look at the, you know, this is just the photo spreads, the home movies, all the stuff that Crawford did to make herself look like Mother of the Year with her adopted daughter. And what did her daughter get for this when she finally grew up to be an adult and told the truth about what was going on in that household? She got adults, people who were 20, 30, 40 years her senior, who knew Joan Crawford, were guests at the house when Christine was a little girl, calling her a jealous little bitch. Yeah, the little girl was the jealous bitch. Keep this in mind when you're watching this stuff, folks. Here's a comment from Utah State Representative Christine Watkins, who is the chair of the Child Welfare Oversight Panel. She said, I had concerns when I heard about the case. Not only were neighbors calling, but older siblings were calling too. It sounds like those kids were in pretty bad shape. And it's certainly something we have the right to call child authorities out on to know what might have gone wrong. Ms. Watkins also questioned whether Franke's status as a well-known YouTube vlogger and the outward appearance that she presented about her family may have influenced child welfare investigators. And for those of you listening, you can imagine the pictures. This is an attractive family. Ruby family and her husband are reasonably attractive people. They clearly have upper middle class money, if not more. The children are all very well groomed. The photographs are all perfectly posed and lit. It's all packaged stuff, right? So normal, lovely upper middle class family. Back to Representative Christine Watkins. Quote, if someone has the resources, they can cover up. They can disguise a lot of things. Even when kids go to court, kids can be told not to say anything. They can be intimidated by the situation. Yes, they can. Or if they're told to say anything, as I was when I was taken to family court, starting at the age of 13, when I was institutionalized, I had to spend both in family court, but also in weekly counseling sessions, sometimes with my mother in the glorified orphanage. I had to pretend to be penitent for 3 or 4 years, and I did. I said everything was my fault. I was a bad boy. I was going to be more respectful to my mother, because that's the only way you could survive. If you weren't penitent, you got punished more. So children go to jail for their parents' crimes. Remember that. That's normal. That's America. You know, this kind of behavior, pimping your children out for the cameras, it's a form of money laundering, but with child abuse instead. It lets abusive and narcissistic women get praise from other women who are too shallow and probably narcissistic themselves to see through the obviously flimsy camera filters through to what's really going on here. And this is largely a mother's sin, not a father's sin. You don't see fathers doing this unless it's gay men. Is that spicy enough for you? No. The father's sin in this is abdicating the father and protector role. Being weak. Leaving your wife to predate on your children. Enabling her. It is disgusting. Kevin Franke, you piece of shit. You're not a man and you're no kind of father. I hope they throw the book at you just as hard. I speculate, I guess, that Kevin Franke is probably actually a cuckold, but not by another man. Now, relatedly, in other female news, feminism, girl power, misogyny, victimization. It's clear to viewers and listeners who've been with us for a while in the show that I dislike feminism, but I think it is time for me to underscore in specific detail exactly why I don't like it and what I find wrong with it. But the first place to start with that is with definitions, because these conversations get bollocksed up all the time because we don't stop and define our terms first. I'm not going to be parsing out liberal feminism from radical feminism. I'm not going to be making apologies and saying not all. Okay, that's not going to happen during this show. It's also not something I'm not gonna give you crumbs in the comments either. So screech about that if you like, but you're not getting anything from me on that front. I'm not going to recognize these complaints. I don't want to hear about how the first wave was righteous and the second wave was kind of righteous and it only went wrong when it was the third wave, or it only went wrong when it was the millennials or the Gen Z. I don't care about any of that. All forms of feminism are not exactly identical and the same. That is true. But all feminisms have one thing in common. And this is the one thing in common that I'm pulling out to say, this is the, what do you call it in the newspaper business? The nut graph, the lead paragraph, the essential boiled down point of feminism. All of these feminisms. Here's my definition. We'll put it up on the screen. Feminism is the political idea that women as a class, the world over and for all time, are in a state of permanent subjugation to men. It includes the idea that men as a class have a sex-wide shared interest in exploiting women, and that is the primary motivation of all men across time and across cultures. That's the part that I object to. And if you are saying, well, I'm a feminist and I don't believe that, then I would ask you, what is it that makes you a feminist? What do you mean when you talk about feminism? Because that is feminism, what I just described. That's feminism. It's nonsense. It's infantile. It's narcissistic victim posing. But it's an incredibly effective power grab. It's the intellectual equivalent of women turning on tears to avoid criticism in live situations, and it's everywhere. It suffuses every single branch of feminism that I've run into, yes, including even the modern feminists who are starting to wake up to the excesses and lies of their sistren, but who won't seek out the whole truth. Because if they did get to the nut graph down to the bottom, their entire political project and the scaffolding on which they've built their public activities and their personalities even would crumble. And nobody wants to face that. And feminism is an act of war against men. I know, I didn't think I'd be saying this either. I know. I'm the gay Rush Limbaugh. I know, I've heard it all. Whether any individual feminist means to do that or not, and many of them, of course, don't mean to do that, at least not consciously, she is participating in a power grab, and she is participating in a war against men as men, not against abusive men, a war against men. Notice that I'm saying absolutely nothing against full legal rights for women. I'm not questioning that. That falls under civil rights. I'm talking about something different, something toxic and dishonest called feminism, or if you like, female supremacy, even if you don't like. Female supremacy disguises itself. Its practitioners pretend to be wounded birds and victims, the better to distract us while they shift responsibility for their actions onto men. Now, let's make it a little more complicated and nuanced, because you know how I love to nuance things. Here's a story from the feminist site Redux, that's spelled Reduxx. It's a site I've recommended before. I recommend it because the writers do accurate, old school, no bullshit, no euphemism reporting on trans issues that every single regular legacy media is too cowardly to do. If you read this site, you will get the actual truth about what's going on with a lot of these controversial cases and with transgenderism more broadly, and you won't get that anywhere else. But I caution you that, like all feminist outlets, Redux is itself female supremacist. It is full of blame-shifting, man-hating women who put their very own sexist sins on the backs of men and then cry misogyny when men point it out and object. So the story we're going to talk about is about Kappa Kappa Gamma in... I can't stand saying Kappa Kappa Gamma, Kappa Kappa Gamma. It's a national sorority, but this is the Wyoming chapter we're talking about. The Kappa Kappa Gamma Wyoming chapter not only allowed a depraved, college-aged man monster to join as a sister, but this sorority punished its own members, women, punished other women, shamed them, called them bigots, pressured them to vote the way they wanted them to vote when these women objected to admitting this man, and then they fought against their own members in court. Did we show? No, we're going to show them soon. Just wait, it's coming. It's coming. You're going to get your visual. I'm going to read to you from Redux's story about this to illustrate it. A sorority at the University of Wyoming will be forced to accommodate a 6'2" trans-identified male after the federal district court rejected a suit brought by 6 of the female members. Women from Kappa Kappa Gamma sued the national leadership of their sorority after expressing discomfort with the presence of Artemis Langford. Artemis. Despite hearing testimony from the women, some of whom stated Langford had watched them undress with an erection, Judge Alan Johnson dismissed the case on August 25th. Johnson stated that redefining the word woman to include males was, quote, Kappa Kappa Gamma's bedrock right as a private voluntary organization and one that this court may not invade. In his decision, Johnson wrote, quote, the University of Wyoming chapter voted to admit, and more broadly, a sorority of hundreds of thousands approved Langford. They voted to approve and admit him. With its inquiry beginning and ending there, the court will not define the word woman today. The delegate of a private voluntary organization interpreted woman, otherwise undefined in the nonprofit bylaws, expansively. This judge may not invade Kappa Kappa Gamma's freedom of expressive association and inject the circumscribed definition that plaintiffs urge, end quote. So I want to underscore here, I haven't read the whole decision myself, but from this quote, notice that the judge is pointing out that it was Kappa Kappa Gamma. This is a female sorority. I'm going to spell everything out as if none of it's obvious. This is a sorority made up of and governed by women. Is that clear and obvious that it's women making these decisions, not men? Okay? I swear, it is unbelievable to me what has to be pointed out that didactically when it comes to talking to feminists. And the judge said, they decided that this was okay and it's not my place to step in. Now, I haven't read the entire judgment, as I said. He may well be legally right. The point here is who was fighting to get this man in and who was fighting to silence the women who were intimidated by it? It was other women. Right? We can all see that, right? Here's the pig in question. Here's Artemis Langford. And this isn't even my final form. This is a goblin. This guy is a male goblin. Notice the smirk in both the as a man picture and the after, the before and after. It's like that. It's that meme from the show The Office. It's the same picture. He just has lipstick on in the other one. It's literally all the difference is mascara and lipstick. He's got the same stupid knit cap on his head. So notice the smirk, both as a man and as a lady man. And I'll give this one to the feminists. They've got a great term for it. They call it the autogyna smirk. And so back to Redux, and this was actually on the Substack blog of one of the Redux contributors or editors, Genevieve Gluck. So I think this represents Redux. Perhaps it just represents Genevieve Gluck by itself, but whatever. I'm sure someone from her crew will be along to correct me. So Genevieve in her article points out the male judge's opinion, but there's something strangely missing from her coverage. I'm going to go back to her coverage and read you a little more. Langford was admitted to Kappa Kappa Gamma last September following the results of a vote enabled by the language put forward in the sorority's, quote, inclusivity guide. However, not all of the women were pleased with the decision, with some alleging they felt pressured into accepting him against their will. Last year, one sorority member came forward to state that the women were initially promised anonymity in regard to the voting process, only to then be required to identify themselves on the online ballot form. This resulted in women feeling, quote, intimidated with voicing their concerns about a man entering the sorority. I can well imagine. But who did the intimidating of the women? We hear about the women victims here, but who are their intimidators? Well, Artemis certainly did some intimidating. Quote from the story. According to court records, Langford had been voyeuristically peeping on the women while they were in intimate situations and, on at least one occasion, had a visible erection while doing so. Surprise, surprise. Next quote. Langford has, while watching members enter the sorority house, had an erection visible through his leggings, the suit says. Other times, he's had a pillow on his lap. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. It's perfectly obvious to anyone looking at this that Mr. Langford is a pervert and a predator. Going by statistics, it's likely that his behavior may escalate to rape if it has not already. This is bog standard criminal profiling known uncontroversially to anybody who has ever watched a true crime show or picked up a true crime book until we were told to forget it 7 years ago. Then all of a sudden, that's not true. It's anti-trans discrimination. But there's still something missing from this Redux article. It's any comment on the plain, glaringly obvious fact that it was other women and other women alone who insisted on letting this man in. They opened the door and let the big bad wolf in, against the protestations of their fellow women. It was other women in Kappa Kappa Gamma's power structure who intimidated the complaining women into silence. It was women-run Kappa Kappa Gamma who fought their own sex in court to win the right to allow sex pest males to be sorority sisters. You'd think that would warrant some comment, but there is none. Artemis Langford is one man. One fat, stupid, unattractive, predatory loser man. He would have no power in this world at all if it weren't for the leftist conformist she-bosses at Kappa Kappa Gamma who will sell their sisters down the river for social justice points. They'll even risk facilitating the rape of their female friends to do it. So why no comment, Redux? Viewers, you're going to see why. I commented on this article on Genevieve's Substack blog in response to another commenter. What you're going to see is typical of the comments by women on that article. This is what most of them look like. Bad men misogyny. So here's the first comment in my response to it. A commenter named Kara writes, No one but a predatory man would do this. Any decent guy would respect women's privacy. This guy is a sleazy voyeur and has no place in that house. Poor girls. She's, of course, absolutely right. But I responded this way. And all the women supporting him against their sorority sisters, conveniently left out. There were several other women commenters there in that thread who were also asking why in the world other women were supporting this dude. They're not all in lockstep. They don't all have a hive mind. I'm not trying to say that. Some of them see it, and they're not happy about it, absolutely. But they're not the majority, unfortunately, at least not when you run into them online. And nobody on the staff at Redux felt moved to chastise any of those women in that comment thread who said, why are other women supporting him? Nobody got chastised. None of the female moderators came down and said, stop it, you're going against the sisterhood. They were, however, motivated to have a go at me. Here's the response from the article's author, Genevieve Gluck. Now, remember, this was my comment. I'm going to read to you my comment again. And all the women supporting him against their sorority sisters, conveniently left out. That's all I wrote. This is what Genevieve Gluck wrote in response. I see Josh has arrived to troll my page with comments blaming women on a story about a perverted and predatory man. You're right about one thing. Women are not a united hive mind in opposition to these men who, on the other hand, have the support of the highest echelons of society, including the White House. If you want so badly to play the blame game, you might do well to take a look at history. If you want to hate on women, do it on your own page. Why was Genevieve so motivated to chastise me and not the other women who said exactly the same thing that I did? With the exception of they didn't say conveniently left out. I realize that's provocative. It's not over the top, though. Come on. Why? Because I pointed out what she left out in her commentary. That's one reason, but mainly because I'm a man. And like many online feminists, she clearly knows who I am. She speaks as if it's that I'm a known quantity and it's a known fact that I show up to troll feminists. I see Josh has shown up, first name only. She knows who I am. I don't haunt all their spaces all the time, but I get this response a lot. Women who I've never spoken to before, there's clearly a mythology and a backstory about me that they have all agreed to because they all talk this way. She acts as if it's a known fact that I comment this way because what I want to do is to troll and to, quote, hate on women. That's just a snotty millennial little girl's way of writing. It's really kind of embarrassing. I like solutions to problems. The solution to this problem at Kappa Kappa Gamma and in women's locker rooms, bathrooms, change rooms, rape shelters all around the country, the solution to this problem is for women to stop using trans against each other to score points and to stand up and say no, to have real solidarity, to actually enact the mythical sisterhood that we are constantly told exists but obviously does not exist. I'm not playing a blame game. I'm pointing out one of the roots of the problem and I'm proposing a solution. But since that would require acknowledging female culpability, and because solving the problem would take away a platform for whining, feminists are not interested in having a solution. Here's what I wrote in response to Genevieve. I have more respect for you than you have for me. You do great work. But you're typically unfair, dismissive, and nasty. My point is reasonable and proportionate. Your inability to see it as anything other than trolling and your reflexive accusation of hating on women is cheap and beneath you. Women have agency. You take actions in the world. You are not innocent victims in every circumstance. And your blindness to the dynamics driving this in this sorority are frankly stunning. I won't darken your door again, don't worry. And I won't ever comment there again. I'm not going to harass anybody. This is why I've joined the growing number of men who won't lift a finger to help feminists. 10 years ago, the Genevieve Glucks of the world would have been asking me for guest posts from a male feminist perspective. Lots of others did. I was an example of a good man. Yes, it's disgusting. It's gross. I know, but that's who I was. But I was just being used by these feminists. Like all male allies, gentlemen, these women don't care about you. They hate you. Even if they act really affectionate to you, they fucking hate you because you're a man. Ask me how I know. I spent my whole life being you. Yes, I dislike this kind of feminist because she is a pseudo-victim, she is exploitative, and she is a man-hater, and she is like my mother. Yes. Yes. I'm not going to deny it. Those are my mommy issues. They're not mommy issues. They're bad female behavior issues. These are not admirable characteristics in women. Any normal man would walk away from a woman like this and leave her to watch her own house burn down from the fire whose fans she flamed herself, if not actually setting it with her own match. I wish all of you feminists the full weight and consequences of the choices you've made. Enjoy. Come back and see us after the break. Can't get enough of our love, baby? That's because you're not subscribed. Move that thumb over to the great big old subscribe button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. We put out audio-only exclusive content that you won't get on any other video platform, so make sure you subscribe today. Looking for a non-woke place to put your money where your mouth is? Put it where my mouth is. Disaffected supporters get access to our private Discord chat server, backstage episode recording sessions, surprise guests, and more, and all it takes is $10 a month. You've got two options. Either Substack, visit us at disaffectedpod.substack.com, or go over to subscribestar.com/disaffected. Remember, choose the $10 level or higher for Discord access. Welcome back. Time Magazine has an interesting story this week. Headline: America has reached peak therapy. Why is our mental health getting worse? Sorry, it just popped into my head. Is we teaching our children? Welcome to the inside of my brain. So Time Magazine notes that while more Americans than ever before in history are getting therapy, more Americans than ever before in history are reporting that their mental health is worse than it's ever been. Check out this graphic that shows the line. You won't be able to read the small print of the data, but I just want you to look at the diverging lines here. They've got two lines. One shows the number of people getting therapy, and it's going up, 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 compared to the line of people who rate their mental health as excellent, which is going down, down, down until it absolutely plunges into the floor most recently. They're going in opposite directions. Time Magazine goes on at some length about this, wondering what could explain it. Is it a response to an increasingly unstable society, an economy that doesn't pay living wages to enough people? Is it the way we do therapy itself? They note that clinicians, therapists, often disagree on the diagnosis that they would give to the exact same patient. This is psychology, therapy, this is soft science. So clinicians disagree. They note that there's little evidence that antidepressants are anywhere near as effective for the number of people as we have been led to believe that they are. And they also note that our society has pathologized all negative feelings and exaggerated them, even normal and mild ones. Today, we call something depression that a generation ago we might have called the blues or a couple of bad weeks. Let me give you a couple of quotes. That's the approach taken by Dr. Paul Minot, who believes psychiatry is too quick to label feelings like sadness and worry as symptoms rather than helping people understand where they come from, what they mean, and how to overcome and even grow from them. In some cases, he says, feeling bad can motivate people to change problematic habits, choices, or relationships, end quote. The article also notes that modern therapy can't decide what works and what doesn't, that clinicians are inconsistent in their therapeutic approaches, and that faddish treatments often take the country by storm. But what this article doesn't talk much about are the base problems. What I see are the base problems. There are many factors that are making us mentally sicker and more stressed out today than we would be normally. But one major factor we're left with, it seems to me, after boiling all of that other stuff down, is the dissolution of the family. The dissolution of the stable two-parent family. The heterosexual family. Families where children are reared, not turned into their parents' friends or trophies. Families where children are disciplined with love, not coddled with toys and groomed to feed their parents' egos or images. I can't say how to fix the problem of the family. There are 16, 32, 64, you can go on and on, other intersecting, intertwined, entangled forces and problems. These problems are caught up in a nexus where it's like a game of cat's cradle, where, you know, that game you play with the strings. Every string is connected to every other string. If you pluck at one string, one over here that doesn't look like it's touching is gonna feel the vibration as well. These are complicated things. So I don't know what the answer is to restabilizing the family. You have to take all sorts of things into context that are ever changing. So there are a lot of prongs, and these strings are all tangled together. But I do know that if we could find a way to make healthy families normal and more common again, millions of people would be off antidepressants. Any good therapist will tell you that family and childhood trauma and neglect account for, I would say, 90% of the mental illness that drives people to seek therapeutic intervention in the first place. Broken and dysfunctional families are caused by cluster B personality disorders, and they cause cluster B personality disorders and mistreatment in this cycle. They cause complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which, as you know, as I've said recently, I believe is actually the descriptive term, the root of almost all of the common mental illnesses that we talk about: depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. You can go on and on and on. Yeah, there appear to be some organic mental diseases. I'm not sure about this. Many cases of schizophrenia appear potentially to me to have a neurological wiring component that is stronger, with a stronger association with schizophrenia than such a wiring problem might have with depression. There are some neurological conditions, but the vast majority of what we call mental illness is largely environmentally induced. That's not to say that certain children aren't more temperamentally sensitive to mistreatment. They are. We know this. People don't pop out of the womb with as total blank slates. They do have some innate hardwired dispositions. But at any rate, it's time for This Week in New Normal. And we've got 3 items for you this time. Let's go to Chicago, and let's look at, first, actually, call back to mind the concept of the external locus of control. Shifting the blame for your actions onto someone else to avoid responsibility. Saying that other people are causing you to feel a way, or other people are making you react a way, rather than taking responsibility for how you choose to react to outside stimuli. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, who is Lori Lightfoot 2.0, actually, no, more like Lori Lightfoot 16.0. He's even way worse than she is. Listen to me. I think of myself as an erudite man. I'm like, he's even way worse than she is. Naturally, Brandon Johnson, a far-left progressive black Democrat, has gone farther than I've ever seen with the external locus of control. This comes from Fox Business News. The city of Chicago is suing 2 automakers amid a growing car theft crisis. Democratic Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's office announced that the city filed a lawsuit against automakers Kia and Hyundai, alleging that both companies have failed to include, quote, industry standard engine immobilizers, end quote, in several models of vehicles, which resulted in a steep rise in crime. Okay. So Brandon Johnson, Chicago mayor, is blaming the theft of cars, Kias and Hyundais, the theft by criminal thugs in his city. He's blaming the thefts on the car makers, Kia and Hyundai. Why? Because Kia and Hyundai, by offering affordable base model cars that don't have optional theft deterrent systems, and I'm so sorry to contradict you, Mr. Mayor, but these are not base model things. These are luxury items. They're not standard items. They're luxury items. But of course, I'm speaking to somebody who doesn't remember the days before even the cheapest $16,000 car came with power locks and remote starting. You don't even know what a base model is, do you, Brandon? So he's going to sue the car makers because they don't put expensive anti-theft devices like engine immobilizers in their base model cars, thus making the cars too easy to steal, and therefore they are to blame for the car theft crisis in Chicago. Here's a quote from the story. The impact of car theft on Chicago residents can be deeply destabilizing, particularly for low to middle income workers who have fewer options for getting to work and taking care of their families, Johnson said. The failure of Kia and Hyundai to install basic auto theft prevention technology in these models is sheer negligence. And as a result, a citywide and nationwide crime spree around automobile theft has been unfolding right before our eyes. That is so goddamn offensive. I can't believe any reporter sat there and listened to that without booing him. That is incredible. That is blame shifting par excellence. This is the same mayor who chastised the press and the public for calling the violent teenagers who did the teen takeover, where they were ripping up property and closing down streets in the Chicago Loop. He got angry at the press and the public for calling these teenage criminals the teenage criminal thugs that they actually are, and that they clearly demonstrated on camera that they are. It was the public and the press's fault for harming them with that language, Mr. Johnson said, and for stigmatizing the teens, who simply didn't have what he called opportunities. They were just tearing shit up because they didn't have opportunities. No strong words for the criminal teens from him, none whatsoever, or for their scumbag parents. Why? Because they're black and he's black. That's why, and we all know it. This is how progressives actually harm the people that they claim that they want to help. They do not hold their constituents to any standards of basic ordinary decency and behavior, let alone hold them to any standards of personal achievement. Getting a job, keeping a job, feeding your kids. We don't have to hold them to account for that. They blame it on the system, on white people, and now on car makers. So he's going to sue the car makers and force them to add expensive luxury extras to their base model affordable Econobox cars, thus putting those cars out of the price reach of poor people that he claims to represent. It's perverse. But worse, here's the response from Hyundai. Quote, Hyundai is committed to comprehensive actions we are undertaking to assist customers and communities affected by the persistent theft of certain vehicles not equipped with push-button ignitions and engine immobilizers. Our dealers across the country are maximizing the number of anti-theft software installations that can be performed on a daily basis, contributing to the steadily increasing completion rates, which we report to NHTSA weekly, the spokesperson said. Kia, Hyundai, I hope you go bankrupt. Now, the federal government is suing Elon Musk over what? Not hiring immigrants. What's this about? Let's turn to the Washington Post. Headline, Justice Department accuses SpaceX of hiring bias against refugees. That's right. Federal government is accusing Elon Musk of bias against refugees and immigrants because he won't hire them for certain jobs at SpaceX that he believes U.S. law requires U.S. citizenship in order to do that job for security reasons. Here's what the Department of Justice had to say. Quote, our investigation found that SpaceX failed failed to fairly consider or hire asylees. That's their new to me, possibly made up word for alleged asylum seekers. Our investigation found that SpaceX failed to fairly consider or hire asylees and refugees because of their citizenship status, and imposed what amounted to a ban on their hire regardless of their qualifications in violation of federal law. Our investigation also found that SpaceX recruiters and high-level officials took actions that actively discouraged asylees and refugees from seeking work opportunities at the company, end quote. The DOJ assures us that it is seeking to hold SpaceX accountable. Yes, I'm going to hold them accountable. Here's what SpaceX has to say about this. They believe that some of the jobs involving rocketry and weapons technology require citizens to fill the jobs under the U.S. International Traffic in Arms regulation. Elon Musk tweeted this in 2020. He said, quote, U.S. law requires at least a green card to be hired at SpaceX as rockets are advanced weapons technology, end quote. Now, the DOJ says Elon did even more xenophobic harm than that. Quote, investigators found at least 14 public announcements stating that SpaceX can only hire U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents because of the International Traffic in Arms regulation, the lawsuit alleges. Okay. I cannot wait for summer to be over. Look at what we're talking about here. The Department of Justice is marshaling the entire resources of the state and all the money required to pay these lawyers to go after Elon Musk and SpaceX for not hiring people who aren't even U.S. citizens. Why? Why? Please, audience, please tell me you see how odd this seems as a system of prioritization. I'm totally sure that South African immigrant Elon Musk hates immigrants. I'm totally sure. And I'm sure that he's motivated by pure white rage and xenophobia, and I'm sure he doesn't actually take security seriously at all. This is what they believe. I'm sure, I'm not being sarcastic now. I believe they believe this because he's white and he's from South Africa. Racist. That's racist. Why doesn't the Department of Justice take security seriously? That's my question. Why are they suing? Even if Musk and his company's lawyers are wrong about their interpretation of U.S. law, which is possible, I don't know, why is the DOJ so motivated to bring the full force of the state out against a man who appears to actually care about U.S. security interests at a rocket company? An immigrant cares more about this country's security than they do. And finally, federal judge says parents cannot say no to queer indoctrination. Headline, federal judge, parents can't opt children out of public school grooming. You're going to see a lot more of these stories. I see a lot of them come across my desk every week. Here are the facts in this case. Some parents in Montgomery County, Maryland, sued the school board, and they did so because the board rescinded its prior policy that allowed families to enact religious exemptions so parents could opt their kids out of LGBTQ plus and sex education lessons. That opt-out is now not allowed. I'm going to say another thing here. Religious exemptions alone are not sufficient. It is not okay to say, you have to be a member of a religion I recognize in order not to have your children indoctrinated. No, I don't. If I had children, I'm not a believer and I'm not going to cite a religion, and I get to make those decisions as well. So I think we need, I know a lot of the audience here are religious people. And it's interesting because we have a lot of common ground. You know that. I say that on the show. We talk about it sometimes on the Substack when you guys communicate with me. And I know that you have an interest and a concern in seeing that religious exemptions be preserved, and I understand that. But I would also ask you to keep in mind, don't get inadvertently chauvinistic and blinkered about this. You don't deserve something because you're religious that I don't deserve as a non-believer. What the rights that you are entitled to enjoy, they're important for everybody to enjoy too. Now, the parents are claiming that this is forcing them, the fact that they can't extract their children from these lessons, and we know what kind of lessons they are. We've seen the perversity many times on this show, that this is forcing them to homeschool their kids or to pay for private school. And the Montgomery County School District's inclusivity policy has allowed books into these schools, we've talked about that too, starting in kindergarten, that discuss pronouns, gender transition, gay pride festivals, drag queens, and more. Here's from the online newspaper, The Epoch Times. Quote, parents sued Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland over the lessons after officials revoked their opt-out policy over the large number of opt-out requests. Parents said the failure to provide opt-outs forced them to give up their religious beliefs or seek alternative schooling. U.S. District Court Judge Deborah Boardman, though, said the parents had not shown that the policy would, quote, result in the indoctrination of their children or otherwise coerce their children to violate or change their religious beliefs, end quote. Really, Judge Boardman? Montgomery County officials said in a statement that the school district, quote, this is getting the voice. If you don't like the voice, turn your volume down for 10 seconds. The school district remains committed to cultivating an inclusive and welcome learning environment and creating opportunities where all students see themselves and their families in curriculum materials. You can smell the pumpkin spice wafting off that. Get your kids out of public schools now. Agitate in whatever way you can to shut down the federal Department of Education. Run for your local school board. Take these goddamn school boards over. Run these perverts out of town on a rail. And I remind you, they're mainly women. Now, we are going to go to a break, but I want to remind you that we have exclusive audio-only content that you're not going to get here on YouTube or Rumble. And this week is a really good one. I sit down with George Zamarripa, my very good friend, and we talk about the peak of American horror movies, the 1970s. We see these movies as actually talking about the dissolution of the family, about addiction, and about personality disorders and intergenerational trauma. Can't get enough of our love, baby? That's because you're not subscribed. Move that thumb over to the great big old subscribe button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. We put out audio-only exclusive content that you won't get on any other video platform, so make sure you subscribe today. Looking for a non-woke place to put your money where your mouth is? Put it where my mouth is. Disaffected supporters get access to our private Discord chat server, backstage episode recording sessions, surprise guests, and more, and all it takes is $10 a month. You've got two options. Either Substack, visit us at disaffectedpod.substack.com, or go over to subscribestar.com/disaffected. Remember, choose the $10 level or higher for Discord access. Welcome back. I'm going to close the show out with some viewer mail and some stories. So last week, recall our episode from last week. And if you haven't watched it, please do. And it is an episode that you want to watch, not one that you want to. Well, I want you to listen. I want you to consume this show any way you can with gusto. But you really are best off putting your eyes on the video from the Burlington City Council that we had out last week. We talked about a city council meeting that happened a couple weeks ago where activists accused the city of Burlington, Vermont, where I live, of racism for doing an audit on the former diversity director named Taisha Green, who is a black woman. Ms. Green was found to have mismanaged hundreds of thousands of dollars, and recall also that when she left Burlington, Ms. Green took basically the same job in Minneapolis, and also recall that a Minneapolis audit found the same mismanagement that the Burlington audit found. In fact, the Minneapolis audit happened first, and it was because of that that the Burlington City Council felt appropriately pressured to review her budgetary activity when she was director of the, what is it called? Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department. So this note came in from a Minneapolis viewer named L. She writes, I thought living in Minneapolis, teaching in and attending a big liberal university, and teaching in an even more progressive one was a nightmare. But this is something else. She's referring to our show from last week. All your Vermont stories belong in a New England Gothic horror short story anthology. When Taisha Green was here, that is Minneapolis, she was accused of the same thing. The comment sections of newspapers were filled with the same kinds of defenses. Then again, they almost always are if the accused is the right identity. But here, the enlightened ones and the privileged identitarian classes mostly feed one another. The straight, overeducated, white progressives cheer them on while double-locking their doors and quietly bemoaning the policies that have wrecked the city in their private Facebook groups. I used to belong to one until I was kicked out for discussing luxury beliefs and pathological altruism. There's one thing I've been trying to figure out, and you've touched on this from time to time. Nearly every one of my colleagues, mostly academics and teachers, has totally bought into all of this. So much so, I am absolutely certain if they knew just how much I don't buy into it, how critical I am of race and gender ideologies and the critical theories that underpin them, they would do all they could to ensure that I'd never have a job in higher ed or education in general. You likely know that I'm not being hyperbolic. L confirmed, you're not being hyperbolic, you're being accurate. I've been able to dodge being outed, but it's likely only a matter of time before I am, or I just leave the field entirely. I have a general understanding as to why people fall for and support these ideologies, but why do you think some people resist or are immune? Is it experience with borderline personality disorder in childhood? Lack of privileged economic and/or stable family upbringing? Is it because they've been targeted themselves? If you get a chance to discuss this, if you could point me to an episode where you already did that, that would be great. Thanks for being relentlessly honest and giving us the insight and language to better understand and navigate the insanity. Thank you, Elle. Thank you. I'm glad you experienced the show that way. That's what I hope to do. And thank you for giving us some more to round out and give context to this story. Why are some people immune? I don't know for sure, but I think that the following kinds of things, the following kinds of people tend to be the immune ones. Number one, most psychological research over the past century indicates that somewhere between 20 to 30% of any population is more resistant to indoctrination. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to say anything about it. About a third of the population, give or take, are really true zealots, true believers. And the remaining third are cowards who keep quiet and go along to get along. That seems to be the way humans simply are. That just seems to be the way it sorts out with humans. Number two, those people who have woken up to cluster B, they understand disordered personalities, authoritarian thinking, because it happened in their own lives. These people are among the most immune to this indoctrination. I'm one of those. And many people who are viewers of the show are also those people too. But there's a really, really big caveat there. We who grow up in these households, in order for us to be immune, we have to have the awakening to what this is. Before that happens, when we're still marinating in the psychodrama of our families without understanding it, we are likely to be among the most zealous ourselves. I certainly was. I'm immune to it now, but I wasn't. I was a sitting duck for it. I was literally raised and groomed and weaned on this. Of course I was vulnerable to it. But I suppose, for those of you for whom that is your story as well, who have woken up to it, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? The consolation prize on the other side is that we tend to be very immune once we get there. So, you know, Elle, I would say that the majority of people are either outright shits or they're just cowards. That's what I think about the majority of people. That's the plain Anglo-Saxon way of describing both the psychological literature and what we can all observe by looking around at people's behavior around us. I thank goodness every day, actually, that this show, that Disaffected, attracts so many of that brave minority to the viewership, because I'd be in even greater despair than I am now if it weren't for viewers like them and viewers like you, Elle, and all the rest of you who watch and who listen and who write to us. So thank you for what you do for us, too. To end this show up, I'm going to tell you a couple of interesting encounters I had this week. This first one was something I never, ever would have predicted. This was a first-time experience for me. The Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door the other day. It's not the first time they've done so, but the way this played out is the first for me. I thought, now I'm moving house right now. Point of personal privilege, quick update, especially to those of you who really, really kindly donated to my fundraiser because my house was flooded in the historic floods. Thank you. Work is proceeding at pace. There's a week and a half left to go. I finally managed to sell my house in Burlington. I'm packing right now, and we're putting up sheetrock and painting and putting down floors. So things are going really quickly. The reason I'm telling you this is I got the knock on my door the other morning when I was having coffee, and I've had so many showings of my house. There were about 40 of them. I thought, oh my God, there's another showing of my house, and I'm in my boxer shorts and I haven't shaved, and blah, blah. And I'm like, no, wait, you sold the house. So then I was like, who dares knock on my door? Well, it's two very pleasant, early middle-aged women, well-groomed, neatly coiffed, wearing dresses, who wanted to talk about what I thought God's kingdom on earth was and whether we were living in that kingdom properly. Now, everyone jokes about the Jehovah's Witnesses irritating people at home, and they've knocked on my door many times in the past, and in the past, I've often rudely turned them away. Not this time. I told these ladies that I was sorry I didn't have the time to talk to them, because I'm not really going to have us sit down and talk about religious things when someone knocks on my door. But I also said that while I was not a believer, I felt that traditional Christian values were more aligned with what I want to see in the world, and that whatever God's kingdom may be, I'm pretty certain that we're not enacting it right now. We're not living up to it. They left me, of course, with some literature. I got the trifold pamphlet about God's kingdom on earth with references to Scripture. And I thanked them and wished them a nice and very productive day. And it was such a pleasant exchange. When everyday business, like just going to the grocery store where I live, is so fractious and rude and hostile and unpredictable, it was really nice. Even though I don't like having my door knocked on. It gives me an anxiety response. It's my neurosis, right? I get it. But I don't like it. But there were these two women smiling. They seemed genuinely affable. They weren't pushy. They weren't rude. They were nice. I'm almost getting choked up about it because, it's this sort of thing. I'm one of those, I don't do it on the show. I don't lose my composure and blubber on the show. You've seen me get choked up a couple of times. You probably will again. But I'm one of those crying men. When I'm by myself, a lot of times my frustration comes out in tears. But I'm more emotionally moved by the kindness. It makes me want to cry more than I want to cry when somebody is angry or rude. I don't know what it is, but it just feels... Maybe it's because I feel so deprived of everyday kindness that when it happens, it just feels really tender. If that makes any sense. I'm going to stop being glurgy and gross now. But it was a door knock, and it was manners out of another era, and it was really nice, and I'm glad it happened. My, do I see the world differently than I did 10 years ago. Then later in the day, I went over to the moving company, the people I hired who are going to haul my boxes for me because I'm too old to play college pizza party in a U-Haul anymore. And I went to get some extra boxes, and I talked to, I'll call her Pam at the moving company. Boy, do I like Pam. 62-year-old mom. And we talked about how no company, her company, no company we either of us do business with can get any workers right now. She's running around like a mad woman. She's in the warehouse and in the storage space. She's going to get the boxes. She's trying to answer the phone. She's trying to talk to me. And I've talked about this on the show before. I mean, it's electricians, furnace installers, roofing contractors, fast food. No, but everybody is understaffed. This is 3.5 years now. 3.5 solid years. This started with the alleged pandemic that didn't exist, but it has not gotten any better. It is not any better today than it was 3.5 years ago, where I live here in Vermont. So she's telling me, Pam is telling me, that there's a new fast food pizza restaurant, Little Caesars, opened up in South Burlington. And they had a sign out, and I remember because I've seen the sign, they had a sign out offering $25 an hour to starting employees to pull pizzas out of them. $25 an hour. Now, you can call me a fool for this, and I was a fool for staying this long for so little money. But when I was a white-collar executive director of a national nonprofit, I made the equivalent of $26 an hour. That was the top salary I made. And you're telling me that you are too good and too skilled to possibly accept $25 an hour for cutting a piece of pizza into 8 slices and putting it in a box. Okay? They had to delay opening that Little Caesars restaurant for an entire month because no one applied. No one. Isn't that amazing? So how is this possible? Pam and I are talking. We talked about a lot of stuff. Pam told me a story that she was in a restaurant a few nights ago. And a couple of other ladies, middle-aged ladies, were having a conversation. And Pam says, I went over, I said, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but I was eavesdropping. She said, can you explain to me what you were talking about? Apparently, these two women work for the Social Security Administration. So they're claims examiners, and they are part of the process of deciding who gets Social Security payments, but also long-term disability payments. These women said to Pam that young people, and they were talking about people in their 20s and 30s, are now claiming to have long COVID, claiming to be autoimmune compromised in shocking numbers, and claiming that it is dangerous for them to be in contact with others. And she described these women, describing some of these clients, actually doing the theater in front of them, like, trying to talk this way so that the air, because autoimmune, I mean, I wouldn't be here in person unless I had to. Where's my strangle doll? These Social Security workers, according to Pam, told her that the government, because all this rolls downhill from the federal government, is simply rubber stamping these people, long-term disability, long-term disability, long-term disability. They just go off, collect their disability check. They don't have to enter the workforce again. They're on long-term disability. I absolutely believe this. I do. We also talked about how elementary school kids are out of control. Using the F word, calling teachers shitheads. She's not the only person locally who's told me this. I know somebody. There's somebody who's a friend of the show who works in the Burlington Public Schools who has confirmed this behavior for me. Telling adults to go to hell, and the teachers are not allowed to correct them. And we talked about what a different world it was for both of us growing up. I mean, she's 62, I'm 49. We're almost a generation apart. But as I've said before, she's late Gen X, early boomer. We're basically the same generation. We share a common set of cultural values. We had a common culture that both of us shared, even though we're separated by 13 years. And she said, this is what she said to me. There's a section of town here off what's called Shelburne Road. It's the end of Burlington, right before you get to the city of Shelburne, the city or town of Shelburne, which is a really hoity-toity upscale place. And it's got all these, well, they call it really nice houses, but they're all, they're only like, 20 to 30 years old. And frankly, they're all in really bad taste, but they look expensive. So Pam says to me, those nice middle-class neighborhoods and houses off Shelburne Road, when I drive through there for deliveries, I see beautiful houses and manicured lawns and 2 shiny new SUVs in every driveway. And you know what I don't see? I don't see any kids outside ever. No kids on bikes. No kids playing basketball in the streets. No kids selling lemonade at lemonade stands. Where have the children gone? I don't know. Yeah, well, I do. They're inside. They're on their phones. They're not allowed, or they're not encouraged, or they're not forced to get outside and get exercise. When you see children on bikes in this city, almost the only, unless you're in the neighborhood I'm moving out of right now, is a kind of down at heel working class street. It's getting worse. The only children that you see riding bikes the way I rode bikes, and the way even middle class kids rode bikes in my day, are when you're in poor neighborhoods. This has become very class specific. The middle class is intensely neurotic and controlling. But the only time you see children on bikes today is when it's a family activity. They've all got their shiny brand name helmets on, their knee pads on. These children have no freedom at all. I see this in the Tony neighborhoods around here. Dad or mom at the head of basically a school of 2-wheeled goslings. All the children are following along in a group family safe biking activity. Everybody stay in line. It's creepy. It is really, really creepy. These children have no freedom. The 3 o'clock rush hour, I know I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. That's new. That's new normal, right? That's not normal, it's new normal. Even in my little town of Winooski, if I get out onto the main thoroughfare at 3 o'clock to go exactly 0.9 miles to the grocery store, it's going to take me 25 minutes because I'm crawling along and stopping because the entire freaking road is backed up with shiny SUVs picking the little kids up from the school. They're not even allowed to walk home a quarter mile. That's middle-class Americans these days. But anyway, thank God for you, Pam. Thank you. You made my week. Everybody, hold on to old normal and let's bring back whatever portion we can. Have a good week.